Good morning, and welcome to West Shore Unitarian Universalist Church. I am Judy Montgomery, your worship associate for today. West Shore is a church that strives to be an anti-racist, anti-oppression, and multicultural community. Our church community welcomes you today and invites you to be present in the richness of your full self, your age, your experiences, your race, your gender, sex, sexual orientation, socioeconomic class, abilities and disabilities, and all else that makes you uniquely you. You are welcome here. A special welcome to those of you here for the first time. If you're here in person, we invite you to stop by the Welcome Center out in the hallway across from the church office. If you're joining us on YouTube and would like to learn more about the church, please reach out to Diane Alcorn. Her contact information is on the church website. A special welcome to our guest speaker this morning, Reverend Rina Shear. Reverend Rina is the community minister at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Cleveland in Shaker Heights, and she also serves as the mental health chaplain at the Cleveland VA Medical Center. Welcome to West Shore. Please see the weekly e-news that is sent out by email on Fridays to learn about events and activities going on this week in our community. There are so very many ways to get involved. I hope you will if you're not. We're sad to share that longtime member Leslie Hahn passed away Friday in California. She was 89 years old and had been a member of West Shore since 1968. More information will be provided in next Friday's e-news. And now I'd like to invite Reverend Burnett up to share a special announcement.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Andy Burnett, a member of West Shore. In the effort to defend democracy, it's important that all voices be heard. To that end, West Shore is working with community partners to increase voter turnout in low voter propensity neighborhoods. We're in need of people who can canvass households in one of the neighborhoods chosen by our partners at Greater Cleveland congregations. These people that we're recruiting, called neighborhood captains, will receive training and support both from Greater Cleveland congregations and from your partners here at West Shore. So if you're interested, I'm going to hang out in the foyer for a little bit after the service. I'll be the big red-headed guy with the blue shirt on. Come talk to me if you'd like, even if you just want to say hi, I'd love to meet you. Thanks for taking a listen.
Thank you, Andy. And once again, welcome. We're glad you're here. Megan?
In our religious education classes, we talk about how the chalice has three parts. It has a stem, it has a cup, and it has a flame. We wonder about the meaning of the flame. Is it the light of love, the light of justice? Perhaps it's the light of mystery that some people call God. The answer, of course, is that it is all of these things and more. Today, as our children, youth, and teachers head to their first day of religious education classes, may this flame represent the light of love. May it represent the light of community, and may it represent the light of belonging. May it light the way to new friendships and learning. Today, we light our chalice in honor of our children and our teachers.
Let us witness to the unity of our spirit by saying together our unison affirmation words. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia y el servicio su ley. Este es nuestro magnífico convenio, vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en el amor y ayudarnos los unos a los otros. Greet each other as feels mutually comfortable. Children and youth may at this time walk quietly to the rotunda where you will meet your teachers. Parents and guardians are welcome to go with their children if they'd like. And if you like, you may include in your greeting a wave at the folks at home. Please join us in singing the first hymn of the day, number 134. The first reading this morning is actually from our Singing the Living tradition, number 578. We can never make the world safe by fighting. Every nation must learn that the people of all nations are children of God and must share the wealth of the world. You may say this is impracticable, far away, can never be accomplished, but it is the work we are appointed to do. Somehow, sometime, somewhere, we must teach this great lesson. And now a reading from John O'Donohue's book, To Bless the Space Between Us. For someone awakening to the trauma of his or her past. For everything under the sun, there is a time. This is the season of your awkward harvesting, when pain takes you where you'd rather not go, through the white curtain of yesterdays to a place you had forgotten you knew from the inside out, and a time when that bitter tree was planted that has grown always invisibly inside you, and whose branches your awakened hands now long to disentangle from your heart. You are coming to see how you're looking often darkened when you should have felt safe enough to fall toward love. How deep down your eyes were always owned by something that faced them through a dark fester of thorns, converting whoever came into a further figure of the wrong. You could only see what touched you as already torn. Now the act of seeing begins your work of mourning, and your memory is ready to show you everything. Having waited all these years for you to return and know. Only you know where the casket of pain is interred. You will have to scrape through all the layers of covering, and according to your readiness, everything will open. May you be blessed with a wise and compassionate guide who can accompany you through the fear and grief until your heart has wept its way to your true self. As your tears fall over that wounded place, may they wash away your hurt and free your heart. May your forgiveness still the hunger of the wound, so that for the first time you can walk away from that place, reunited with your banished heart, now healed and freed, and feel the clear, free air bless your new face. John O'Donohue.
Let us now enter into a time that some call prayer and some call meditation. Mysterious source of all being, spirit of life and spirit of love, we come to you from many paths, and we gather this morning to recognize our common humanity. We hold the refugees from violence and poverty all around the world in our hearts and minds this morning. We hold in our hearts members of the congregation who struggle with illness and pain. We offer solace to those whose minds are restless and anxious. We offer compassion and hope to those in bondage to drugs and alcohol, that they may be clear-eyed and healthy once again. We acknowledge the power of individuals to continue oppression, but in this place we honor the greater power of love and justice to transform our world. We witness to the beauty of a hope that can resist numbness. May we be filled with a passion to work in this world, creating pathways to freedom and wholeness for all peoples. May it be so. Amen. And now all are welcome to come forward to share from your heart by placing a stone in the sand tray at the front of the room. You may express a hope, a prayer, or an intention. You may also write your thoughts on a yellow card on the other table, and you can put in the basket or in the offering plate when it comes around later during the service. Know that whatever you write on the card will remain in confidence, and if you request a follow-up with Reverend Anthony or someone on the Pastoral Care Committee, they will contact you. These are the sorrows and joys of our hearts, which Reverend Anthony will take into his meditations this week and pray for all that is our life.
Recently, Reverend McCarr received a very special invitation from the Reverend Bill Sinkford, past president of the Unitarian Universalist Association and member of Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism, BLUE. He wrote, "Dear Reverend McCarr, I am writing to encourage you to join me, First Unitarian Portland, and several other of our large UU congregations in regular support of BLUE, Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. According to BLUE's records, your congregation has not been a financial supporter. I serve on the BLUE advisory team, and I am a personal supporter of BLUE as well. The ministry to Black UUs and to many Black folks who are now UU adjacent is a source of hope for our faith. BLUE does not drain energy from UU congregations. It builds energy for Unitarian Universalism. We all receive many requests for support. I am writing to let you know my affirmation of the ministry that BLUE is doing and the value of having a thriving BLUE as part of the ministry of our faith. I hope your congregation is asking what concrete steps they can take to live out their commitment to the building of beloved community. I hope you will make a commitment to support BLUE, a part of your response. We need not only to center the voices of marginalized communities, we need to support them. Thanks in advance for your consideration, and blessings, Bill Sinkford." So that's the letter, and especially in light of this congregation's overwhelming support of the eighth principle, we are, yes, we are proud to devote this Sunday's outreach offering, sponsored by the Justice and Outreach Council, to Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism, or BLUE. West Shore does indeed want to do its part to help build the beloved community and support BLUE's work, which is to be a place where Black UUs can expand their power and capacity within our faith, minister to the particular needs of Black UUs, and work together for justice and liberation. This morning's offering will now be given and gratefully received.
I want to honor the beauty of that music. Thank you, West Shore Choir and Dave. It is a privilege to be in this pulpit today and with this congregation, and I so appreciate your presence here. So I am not a parish minister like Reverend Anthony. I am what in Unitarian Universalist world is called a community minister, meaning that I work outside of the walls of the church or the congregation. And so my weekdays are spent serving as a chaplain at the VA Medical Center in Wade Park, not too far away, over in University Circle. And I work serving veterans in the aftermath of trauma and addiction and mental health, mental illness, and this thing called moral injury that I'm going to be talking about in more depth later this morning. So serving veterans at the medical center has helped me to broaden my ideas about the kind of relationship that I personally want to have with those who have served in the military. And this includes this ongoing relationship I have with my father, who has been deceased for almost 40 years, but who was a combat vet. And so this idea of trauma-informed ministry and post-traumatic stress and moral injury is very, very personal to me. And I'm going to share a little bit about myself as well because I'm new to this congregation. So I'm a child of the 1960s and the 70s, and I was not raised to be particularly patriotic by my family, by my father. He had been drafted into the Korean War, and he never wanted to talk about his time in Korea. He had this beautiful photo album, which I now have, with a lot of the black and white snapshots of the hot summer and the cold winter that he spent there, a lot of news clippings about who he was with there and what they did. But he would never sit down and talk to my sister or I about any of his experiences or his memories there. He was wounded in Korea, and he also contracted malaria. And one very distinct childhood memory I have of my father is he was on the couch in our family room, living room, and he was in a malarial fever, and he was screaming and having these really nightmarish flashbacks of being in a tank and being attacked. He was infantry. And now that I minister to soldiers with post-traumatic stress and moral injury, I'm fairly certain that my father suffered from this kind of distress. He was emotionally distant. He was very isolationist in his politics. He had a real mistrust of the government and basically of people in general. He had a dependent relationship to alcohol, and all of the research on addiction and trauma show how closely related they are. So my childhood was filled with TV news images of the Vietnam War, the images of shame that some of the soldiers felt when they were returning home. And I'm wondering how many of you saw the brilliant documentary on the Vietnam War by Lynn Novak and Ken Burns. How many people saw that? It was brilliant. And as a young adult, I protested military interventions in the Middle East. I was a member of Code Pink for many, many years and went to countless protest marches. I had placed myself on this high moral ground of being against war, military intervention, and military funding. It was very easy for me to say that war is bad and fighting never solves the issue. And when I became the mother of 2 sons, my mantra was, nobody ever wins in a war. And in short, I didn't really take any opportunities to engage with military personnel at all. They were unknown to me, so it was this very one-sided conversation. And now, after a call to ministry that led to a midlife career change, not a midlife crisis, there was no sports car or anything like that involved, but a midlife call to ministry that changed my life. I deal with the human soul in the aftermath of war. And I continue to be immersed with the questions that were so beautifully sung in our anthem. When will the fighting cease? When will we live in peace? Because the combat veterans that I work with, suffering from post-traumatic stress and moral injury, the fighting doesn't cease. It's really difficult to find this elusive thing we call peace in your mind and your physical body and your heart. And I entered chaplaincy feeling sure that my call was really focused on hospice and palliative care, and I actually did 3 rounds on hospice and loved it. And then I did a rotation in the PTSD clinic at the VA, and I was just hooked. I was hooked. Here was where I saw damaged hearts and minds, but also this incredible possibility for healing and transformation. I became more and more called to work with these combat vets who were really struggling with the feelings of disconnect between what they were trained to do as soldiers and their spiritual sense of what is right and wrong. And they were struggling with a misalignment of a personal moral compass. So this spiritual and moral disconnect is what we now call moral injury. It's nothing new. It's been around since human beings have been violent to one another. Moral injury is different than post-traumatic stress, and not all veterans who live with post-traumatic stress may suffer from moral injury, and vice versa. So post-traumatic stress is, in the DSM, it's considered more of a fear-based response to trauma. And so when we talk about post-traumatic stress, we might see someone who is very irritable, who is depressed, who may be hypervigilant, who, their blood pressure can raise very, very quickly when there's any trigger in their environment, and there can be nightmares. So we consider it more of a physiological response to stress and to trauma. Moral injury, on the other hand, is looked at as more of the emotional or spiritual response to something that wasn't right. And we talk about moral injury in terms of, particularly in a very high-stakes situation, under the rules of engagement, or in a military training environment, when you see something, do something, or cannot prevent something from happening that doesn't seem right. And moral injury is really sticky, very, very sticky. It's also very personal. It's very subjective, because we all have our own moral compass, and we all have our own sense of what is spiritual, what is holy, what is meaningful to us. And in working with veterans suffering from moral injury distress, there can be depression, absolutely, irritability, lots of anger, but what we also see is feelings of guilt, shame, regret, grief. Profound grief on different levels with moral injury. So my ministry is centered on creating sacred space where someone is able to feel safe enough to tell me their story and express the spiritual and emotional struggle that is part of that story. Developing a trusting relationship with someone who has experienced trauma is difficult. and very naturally so. When we talk about trauma-informed care, this means that the moment that I meet a veteran, I need to acknowledge that there is this whole story that I don't know yet behind the veteran. What I might see is the way he or she carries themselves. What I might see is that they're shaking when they're meeting with me, or that they are coming down from a substance. They're, just entering rehab. And this history begins from really the time that we're in utero, right? Because we know that trauma and stress are intergenerational, and we know that the way that the brain and the body form begins, literally, from the time that we are growing in the mom's belly, is what I tell them. And so we have the framework of what has happened to you that has brought you here to the VA. It's not what's wrong with you. Why do you have 2 DUIs? Why have you been in rehab 4 times? Why can't you hold a job? It's, let's explore what has happened to you that has brought you to sitting in this room with me, your chaplain. So healing can only begin when there is a trusting environment, when someone can begin to tell their story, externalize all this that maybe has been bottled up in them for many, many years. Now, of course, there's a lot of things about the way you position your chair, different sense, not having sense, lighting. There are all these things, but it's really about being able to listen very, very deeply without any kind of judgment, and showing this not only through your words, but through your body. And, over the years I've learned people join the military for so many different reasons, out of a deep sense of honor and patriotism, out of wanting for discipline. I work with many veterans who join the military as an act of desperation to leave a traumatic home. And they thought that was the best way out. And of course, in our nation's history, many, many people, men, were drafted, and they had no choice, like my father. And since the draft has ended, the military has become a place of refuge for many young people who are really trying to escape generational trauma in their homes and their communities. So when I meet someone at the hospital, I never make any assumptions about how this person is going to feel about his or her service and what their reasons for joining and serving are. So all of the veterans I work with have some kind of mental health and trauma diagnosis, and most are either in recovery from substance use or in active addiction. It seems, I'm kind of talking anecdotally, but I seem to work with a lot of Marines, a lot of Navy medic attachments or Army, because these are all of the forces that go in first. They're on the ground first. And these men and women are taught to be incredibly self-sufficient, and they do not want to ask for help. They are trained to get the mission done, and they are trained that other people can lean on them. And unfortunately, they often come to us feeling suicidal. And I meet many of them on the inpatient psychiatric unit, which is one of the units that I cover. And sometimes they're ready to talk because they've been down this path many times before, and other times they're not ready. If they're ready to talk, they often have two different kinds of questions. And the first question is going to be, and these are what we call the Odyssey questions. So they're the questions of why do bad things happen? Why do people suffer? So the first question is, how could a God allow what I have seen to happen? There cannot be a God that would allow this. And they have lost the relationship that they once had with God, or whatever was their holy ideal. It might be a trust in the goodness of humanity that has been shattered. And with moral injury, it always includes a shattering of who they thought themselves to be before the traumatic event. The second question I get is something like, "Chap, will God ever forgive me? I've done some really bad things." If people really knew what I have seen and done, they wouldn't want me in their lives. These are so this is incredible suffering. The majority of the veterans I work with are Christian. In fact, the majority of our armed forces are Christian, would identify as some kind of Christian, about 80%. And many of them have a concept of an all-powerful God, and the idea of God's judgment and whether they will go to heaven or hell is very real, and it's a very deep form of suffering. Those that identify perhaps as atheist or agnostic or spiritual, not religious, they still have incredible feelings of guilt and shame that they are not worthy to be living in society. They're not worthy to be part of this fabric of society that we all feel that we are a part of. And in both cases, a veteran can't process who they are now because who they are now does not match up to who they were before their time in the military. And there's this lament of, I just want to go back to the way that it was. I just want to be that person I was before I joined up. And so this is such a profound moral and spiritual disconnect. And there's really been no opportunity for integration of all these different parts of the self. So our government trains people to kill, right? They train men and women to kill. And this takes weeks and weeks of training and mind control. Military personnel are trained to become desensitized to another group of human beings. I mean, how else could they do their job? But when someone is discharged from the military, there is no program to help them process to come back to a civilian society. It might only be 48 or 72 hours from the time they're in a combat zone to the time they're back in their little town in Ohio. And so the veteran has lost so much of what was supportive. They've lost being in a unit, a sense of camaraderie, a sense of belonging to something bigger than themselves, a mission, a purpose. So this thing we call readjustment is very, very difficult. And they tell me their stories. If I'm able to develop a relationship, they tell me stories because chaplains have this wonderful thing called confidentiality. Unless someone is actively suicidal or homicidal, whatever they tell a chaplain, it doesn't need to go any further. So they tell me their stories, why they drink to pass out because they don't want to go to sleep. They can't sleep or they're afraid to go to sleep because of the nightmares. Why they would rather shoot heroin knowing it's laced with fentanyl because being in their real world and remembering the faces or events is too painful. They tell me how at age 19, after growing up in a small town in Ohio and being an altar boy and the senior class president and the football captain, they somehow find themselves at My Lai, and they follow orders. But once they come back home, they can never set foot in a church again because they have this profound disconnect of who they are, and their regret and shame and guilt is so overwhelming. They tell me they're haunted by a prisoner they interrogated at Abu Ghraib. They tell me of being on patrol and seeing their best friend die because as a medic they didn't have what they needed to save them. And they feel they failed their duty to protect the people that they were with in their unit. They tell me of being in the front lines of a jungle and being so frightened that they ran to the back. And they were called a coward, and this label has stuck with them for 50 years, over 50 years. So I enter into what Sister Helen Prejean calls a dreadful intimacy with the person who tells you the worst thing they have ever had to live through, in their duty to protect the citizens of the United States. So these are all examples of moral injury. So how do we begin to offer healing and hope? So I work on an interdisciplinary team of other hospital personnel, so psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, recreational therapists, art therapists. And my job is not to diagnose, although I have training in mental health and I continue to seek training in mental health. I do not diagnose, so there's no labels that a chaplain gives anyone. I accompany and I listen and I offer theological reflection and spiritual practices to help them try to accept all the parts of who they are now, that person that is still hidden inside of them. Underneath all the righteous anger and the rage and the shame and the drugs and the alcohol and the isolation. And I try to offer them hope in whatever religious practices are important to them, whatever religious beliefs are important to them. And if there is a religious belief that is what we would call negative spiritual coping, then we work very hard to try to bring about a shift in perspective to perhaps a more positive imagination of what grace and mercy might look like for them. Because one thing about trauma is that trauma shuts down the imagination, right? And you need imagination to hope. You need imagination to see a different way out of where you are. So in weekly moral injury groups, and sometimes I work a lot in individual appointments as well, we read quotes, we listen to songs, they explore emotions like hope and trust and anger and grief, compassion, forgiveness. And in our closing hymn, we're going to sing one of the songs that we listened to, Lean on Me. And I want you to really hear verse 2, which is, please swallow your pride. If I have things you need to borrow, for no one can fill those of your needs that you won't show. So it's trying to create a space where someone can let what they need be spoken. So we try to create an environment where veterans can figure out what he or she needs to heal and begin to move forward. And so I use a lot of mindfulness, prayer, we walk the labyrinth, we do writing, we do art, we paint masks, all these different modalities to help with imagination, to help with creating a sense of what is still sacred or what might become more sacred, to bring about hope for the future. And what I bring to these veterans from our Unitarian Universalist faith is an unwavering belief that redemption and salvation is available to them from their God, from the universal mystery, from maybe even from a people who do not have any magical power to enact punishment or revenge. Depends on what their spiritual and religious beliefs are. So whatever that belief is, we start there, and then we slowly try to work to a healthier view that includes acceptance, definitely a lot of compassion, and maybe forgiveness for others or self-forgiveness. And I use the story of Kinsakuroi and the image on the cover of the Order of Service. So you have it there on your cover. And I use this in my groups. And I tell the story. In the 15th century, there was a wealthy shogun who broke his favorite teacup. And he was really upset. It was his favorite teacup, and he wanted to get it repaired. And so he sent it to China to get it repaired. And at that time, objects were repaired with like metal ligaments, almost like staples or threading together. And it came back, and it didn't look right, and it couldn't hold tea, right? There were holes in it. And so he said, I think we're going to figure out how to get this teacup repaired, because it's very special to me. It's useful, it's beautiful, it's special to me. And so they found a Japanese craftsman who was able to repair it using like lacquered resin and gold powder. And so to really kind of highlight the beauty of these cracks. And so we look at this image and we look at the definition of kintsukuroi. And we talk about the importance of keeping someone around even after it may be broken or cracked, and how highlighting the cracks might even be a way of making something more beautiful. And so it's this idea that we don't throw ourselves away because we've been traumatized. We can be repaired, and no, we will never be the same as we were before the trauma. That is not possible. But we can be something new and stronger and more beautiful. My Universalist theology guides me to offer our veterans the idea that they are never defined by a worst action or someone they were not able to help. They are never defined by that. No one is outside of our circle of love and compassion. No one is outside of responsibility or accountability either. And there may be a necessary journey of making amends. And so I try to help craft a path of what would this look like for you individually. And this journey always involves grieving. So there's always grief involved in this. And there's always a grief for the person that is now gone. But that grief has to happen for there to be any room left for this new person that they are becoming. And as a people of faith, we must acknowledge that our society and our democracy is part of creating this whole situation. That is my role as a community minister. If we believe in the interconnectedness of all beings, and knowing that we live in a democracy and our faith, I mean, Reverend Andy was just up here talking about voting as a part of democracy, then we have to acknowledge that as citizens of this nation, we are complicit in the wars and the conflicts. There's no standing outside of that complicity. And our society has sanctioned the poverty, the violence, and the lack of support services for families and children that lead so many of our young people now to enter the military, what we sometimes call this economic draft. So my responsibility is to be with someone as they try to piece their spiritual selves together. And offering this perspective of kintsukuroi can be very, very helpful. And sometimes it can even be an emblem of what post-traumatic growth might look like. So, it's become very commonplace for people to say to a veteran, "Thank you for your service," when they see someone in a hat or with a t-shirt. And I'm always really reticent to say this until I know the veteran, because this can be a really loaded statement. For the Vietnam vet, it may remind them that when they returned home, they were shunned and shamed. Or it also may be very healing in that someone is finally thanking them for their service, after 50 years. For the vet who fought in the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan, the Gulf, it can be very painful, particularly now with the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan. It also could be very much appreciated because during their time in country, they really connected and felt that they were able to help people have a better life. And, there are people of our faith who oppose military actions, and there are those who really believe that it's necessary. So we still struggle as a faith, and we have a lot of questions about what's my individual role as a citizen of this country to send young people into combat. But there should be no argument about how to treat our veterans once they have returned to us. We have a responsibility to healing veterans physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually when they return. Because when we train human beings how to take a life, we are stepping into sacred territory. And we also train our soldiers to face the reality of their own death. And that's also in the province of the holy. So talking about life and death is always, always a spiritual conversation. And as we work to reintegrate veterans who have come back to us terribly changed, we are faced with the task of integrating personally and as a society, what do these lives mean to us? What do these lives mean to us? So the heart of my Unitarian Universalist faith calls me to work with others to create, what we call the beloved community. And the term beloved community often reminds us of Martin Luther King Jr. and racism and, white privilege. But the larger concept of beloved community is to be able to integrate our experiences as human beings into who we are so that we are spiritually integrated as well. And a long-standing part of our faith tradition is to be able to embody our religious beliefs in the community through our actions. This is really the legacy of our denomination. So my religion calls me to create spaces every day in the lives of veterans I serve and in our faith communities for healing and conversation. I want to be able to respectfully discuss issues of war and peace with those that I meet. If I'm also going to really live into and model this idea of our principle, the free search for truth and meaning. And my religion tells me that even if I'm curious about your decision to join the military, I'm still responsible for helping you with your spiritual healing when you return. Because how we interact like this on a day-to-day basis is creating the beloved community. So your call to action, so you know the end is coming, right? Because I'm giving you a call to action, is to continue to reflect on how your actions help heal the world. Because a healed world ultimately leads to peace. And we can hold on to this vision even when it seems too difficult to embody, because our faith gives us hope. And we lean on each other to create the resilience that we need to keep being hopeful. And so we leave this service today singing this hymn, Lean on Me. And so please stand as you are willing and able for hymn 1021, Lean on Me.
Sometimes in our lives we all have pain, we all have sorrow, but if we are wise, we know that there's always tomorrow. Lean on me when you're not strong, and I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry
Please be seated. Now, to those of you at home, bring your chalice close to extinguish it as I extinguish the chalice here. We extinguish our flames, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry with us until we meet again.
Just a reminder before the benediction words, I will be leading the sermon chat at noon. Today it will be from 12 to 12:30. It is always a rich conversation about ideas or feelings that may have come up during today's service. So come and join us. We will be in the chapel. Prepare your hearts for our benediction. We are one, after all, you and I. Together we suffer, together we exist, and forever we will recreate each other. Wise words from Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Go in peace, go in love, and go in hope. Blessed be.